The human race was dying, but not without a fight. It was 753 AD, and humanity's numbers had dwindled to the thousands after centuries of war, famine, pollution, and decay turned Earth's surface into an endless desert wasteland. The once proud metropolises had crumbled to ruins, haunted by starving survivors picking through the rubble for scraps. Suddenly a shadow blocked out the sun. Grizzled ex-soldier Walter Johnson ducked into an alley and looked up to see a massive alien starship descending through the clouds. He pulled his scarf over his face as the ship's thrusters kicked up dust and debris. Ramps extended from the craft's underbelly, and armored Elysian troops marched out. Amphibious monstrosities wielding plasma rifles. They began kicking down doors and dragging screaming humans out into the streets. Walter unholstered his pistol, preparing to open fire when a hand grabbed his shoulder. It was Jack Briggs, Walter's old war buddy. "Don't, Walt. There's too many of them. I've seen those things vaporize entire platoons like it was nothing." "Damn it, Jack, we can't just let them take our people. You know what those Elysian bastards do to their prisoners." "I know, but we gotta be smart about this. The Resistance has been watching them for months. They've taken thousands off-world already for slave labor and sick experiments. We're trying to infiltrate their ship and—" An Elysian transport skiff drifted by overhead. Walter and Jack ducked behind a dumpster until it passed. "Look, our hideout is just a few blocks from here," Jack whispered. "My CO will explain everything, but we gotta move now before they get down." Jack tackled Walter as a plasma blast scorched the wall behind them. 3 Elysians appeared at the end of the alley, opening fire. The humans scrambled to their feet and sprinted away, ducking and dodging streaks of superheated plasma. The aliens gave chase, bounding after them on powerful hind limbs evolved for the higher gravity of their homeworld. Walter blind-fired his pistol behind him, but the bullets just sparked off the creature's exoskeletons harmlessly. They wouldn't escape. The Elysians were closing in fast. This is it, Walter thought. This is how it ends. The fall of the human race. No, he wouldn't allow it. Humanity would not go quietly. Walter skidded to a stop and grabbed Jack. "Wait, no, Walter, don't—" But Walter was already charging back at the Elysians, screaming in berserker fury, firing his pistol on full auto. Plasma bolts whizzed by his head. Walter felt one slice through his cheek, instantly cauterizing the wound. He returned fire, aim steady, grip firm. Bullets sparked off the lead alien's helmet, cracking its tinted visor. Viscous yellow blood sprayed out. The creature shrieked and fell. The other 2 opened up on full auto. Walter dove and rolled, feeling the heat of plasma singeing his jacket. He came up in a crouch and dumped his mag into the second Elysian's knees. It lost its footing and pitched forward. Walter lunged and caught the third in a flying tackle. They smashed through a storefront window in a shower of glass. Walter lost his gun in the tumble. The Elysian rose to its feet, looming over him, rifle leveled at his face. The alien's lipless mouth twisted into what passed for a grin on its species. It reached for its comm, no doubt to alert the others. Walter knew he was dead. So be it. He bought Jack the time he needed. The Resistance would carry on the fight. As long as humans still drew breath, hope remained. Walter spat blood and grinned back at the alien. "Smile all you want, you scaly piece of shit," he growled. "We'll make you choke on it soon enough." The Elysian scowled and flicked off its rifle's safety. The Elysian's finger tightened on the trigger. Walter closed his eyes, ready for the end. Boom! An explosion outside rocked the building. The Elysian jolted in surprise, its shot going wide. Walter lunged for his pistol and fired 3 rounds into the creature's head at point-blank range, blasting its brains across the wall. Panting, Walter staggered to his feet and peered out the shattered window. Smoke and flames billowed from a crater down the block. Some kind of IED had taken out an Elysian APC. Jack's doing, no doubt. Always did have a knack for things that went boom. Walter hotwired an abandoned car and sped back to the Resistance hideout, following the directions Jack gave him. When he arrived, Jack pulled him into a bear hug. "Walt, thank God, I thought they got you." "Almost did. Looks like I owe you one." Jack's face turned grim. "That was just a distraction. We need to hit these bastards where it hurts. I'm talking about taking the fight to them." "The fight to them? You mean—" "That's right. Their ship. We're going to infiltrate that flying roach motel and gut the fuckers from the inside." Walter gave a determined nod. "What's the plan?" Jack unfurled a faded subway map on the table. Before the war, the city had an extensive underground tunnel network. Old subway lines, sewer mains, utility access. Most of it's collapsed or flooded now, but there's a chance some of the deeper routes are still passable. He traced a line with his finger. "Intel shows the Elysians have an outpost here by the old train yards. It's connected to these old tunnels. That could be our back door in." Walter frowned. "It's a long shot. We'd need some serious gear to even stand a chance." "Leave that to me. Let's just say I know a guy. Suit up and meet me at the 45th Street station in an hour." An hour later, Walter climbed down the rust-eaten ladder into the 45th Street subway tunnel. The fetid stench of stagnant water and decay hit him like a punch to the gut. He clicked on his flashlight and nearly leaped out of his skin. Two green eyes stared back at him from the darkness. Jack grinned, his face smeared with camo paint. "Glad you could make it." He shouldered a bulging duffel bag and took point, leading them into the dank tunnel. They slogged through the flooded subway for hours, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The only sounds were the sloshing of their footsteps and the skittering of unseen vermin. Without warning, Jack stopped short, aiming his flashlight beam at a stenciled metal door set into the tunnel wall. "We're here," he whispered. "An old military storage facility. With any luck, there'll be something inside we can use." He booted the door in and swept his light across the chamber. Weapon racks and ammo crates lined the walls, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Jack made a beeline for a stack of olive-drab crates in the corner. "Pay dirt. I knew this place supplied some CIA black bag shit back in the day. Check it out." He popped the latches and lifted out a strange-looking backpack with cables snaking to a headset and goggles. Adaptive camouflage prototype. Uses some kind of phased array optics to bend light around the wearer. Basically, an invisibility cloak. Walter took the suit from him, a plan already forming. "You take this back to the hideout," he said. "Coordinate with the other cells. Feed them the Elysians' positions, set up ambushes and sabotage. Fuck up their operations planet-side. I'm going to use this bad boy to ghost my way into their outpost. See what other intel I can dig up. Then I'm going to find a way onto that ship." Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. He knew once Walter set his mind to something, there was no talking him out of it. "Give 'em hell, brother," he said, clasping Walter's hand. Walter crept through the ventilation ducts of the Elysian outpost, peering through the grates into the chambers below. The active camo suit rendered him practically invisible as he dropped soundlessly into a dimly lit room. A strangled scream made him whip around, pistol raised. On a metal slab in the center of the room was a human man, naked and strapped down. Two Elysians in white smocks lorded over him, surgical instruments in hand. As Walter watched in revulsion, they began meticulously peeling strips of skin from the man's body, ignoring his agonized screams. "Where is it, human?" one of them rasped. "Where is the artifact?" A scaly fist smashed into the man's face, snapping his head to the side. "Lies! We know it is here, somewhere on this miserable planet. It called to us across the stars. The artifact promises ultimate power. We will rip this world apart until we find it." The man's eyes rolled back in his skull, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please, no more. Just let me die." "As you wish." The Elysian produced a long, gleaming scalpel. In one deft motion, it slit the man's throat from ear to ear. Blood geysered, and the man shuddered once before going limp, his last gurgling breath bubbling through the gash in his neck. Walter fought down the urge to vomit. He knew the Elysians were cruel, but this was monstrous on a whole new level. And what was this artifact they mentioned? Some doomsday weapon? He had to find out more. Spotting a computer terminal on the far wall, Walter crept over and jacked in a data slug, praying to whatever gods were left that the Elysians hadn't changed their access codes since the last time the Resistance had hacked their systems. The screen flickered, and rows of alien sigils scrolled past. It was in. Walter scanned the files, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The Elysians had found references to the artifact in the ruins of ancient human civilizations, fragmentary texts hinting at an object of immense power left behind by the gods. They believed it was the key to their ascension. But that wasn't all. Schematics and progress logs detailed a horrific program of experiments performed on abducted humans. Genetic augmentations, cybernetic implants, combat stims. They were trying to create a slave army, expendable shock troops to fight their wars as they continued their search. Walter swallowed back the bile rising in his throat and downloaded the data. He had to get this to Jack and the Resistance before it was too late. Alarms blared as Walter raced through the corridors of the Elysian ship, his adaptive camo flickering and sparking. They were on to him. He must have tripped a hidden sensor. The room was filled with glass tanks, each one containing a naked human figure suspended in bubbling green fluid. Tubes and wires penetrated their bodies at every joint. Their skin was mottled grey, their eyes replaced by glowing red implants. As Walter stared in horror, one of the tanks drained and hissed open. The figure inside twitched and then sat up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It swung its head in Walter's direction, metal jaws clacking and servos whirring. It was an abomination, a fusion of man and machine, and it was looking right at him. A synthesized screech burst from the creature's vocal processor, and it lunged, pistons hissing, talons flashing under the harsh white lights. The abomination lunged at Walter, a grotesque fusion of man and machine. He dodged to the side, barely avoiding its slashing talons. The creature's glowing red eyes fixed on him with malevolent intent. Walter fired his pistol, the shot sparking off the thing's metal exoskeleton. It kept coming, servos whining, hydraulic muscles bulging beneath pallid flesh. Walter backed away, mind racing. These monstrosities were the key to everything. The Elysians' plan hinged on their twisted super-soldier program. He had to shut it down, cut off the head of the snake. And he knew just where to start. Walter sprinted down the corridors, the abomination's shrieks echoing behind him. He had memorized the ship's layout from the stolen schematics. The atmospheric processor was in the aft section. If he could damage it, vent the ship's air supply. Walter skidded around a corner and found himself face to face with a squad of Elysian troopers. For a split second, both sides froze in surprise. Then the aliens opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled past Walter's head as he dove for cover behind a bulkhead. The stealth suit shimmered, bending the light around him, but the Elysians had already seen him. He blind-fired around the edge of the bulkhead, buying himself a precious few seconds. Walter ripped a plasma grenade from his belt and primed the charge. He counted down in his head, 3, 2, 1, then leaned out and hurled it at the Elysians. The grenade detonated in a blinding flash, vaporizing the troopers where they stood. In the confusion, Walter slipped past and sprinted for the atmospheric control room. The door was sealed, but his stolen security codes made short work of it. Walter burst into the chamber, then stopped short. A woman was slumped against the far wall, clutching a wound in her side. Her white lab coat was stained crimson. She looked up at him, eyes widening in surprise and fear. "It's okay," Walter said, raising his hands. "I'm here to help. I'm with the Resistance." The woman struggled to her feet, wincing. "The Resistance, thank God. I thought I was dead for sure. I'm Dr. Evelyn Pierce. I was a xenobiologist before all this." "Dr. Pierce, I need you to help me sabotage the ship's life support. We have to stop the Elysians' experiments." Evelyn nodded grimly. "I've seen terrible things, obscene things. Those creatures, they used to be human. The Elysians are trying to create the perfect soldier, but that's not the worst of it." She limped over to a console and pulled up a flickering hologram. It depicted an ornate, clockwork-like object, roughly the size and shape of a human heart. Strange runes etched its surface. "They call it the Omega device," Evelyn said. "An artifact of unimaginable power left behind by a long-dead race. It can reshape reality itself. The Elysians think it's somewhere on Earth. That's why they came. That's why they're rounding up humans for their sick tests." Walter stared at the image, a chill crawling up his spine. In the wrong hands, a thing like that, it could mean the end of everything. "We can't let them get it," he growled. "Where is this thing, do you know?" "I heard them talking. They think it's hidden under the ruins of an ancient city in a secret government bunker. That's all I know, I swear." "Then that's where we're headed, but first—" Walter turned to the atmospheric controls and began entering commands. A harsh klaxon blared, and red warning lights strobed. Vents hissed open all across the ship, bleeding precious air into the void. Evelyn watched him work, hope kindling in her eyes for the first time in months. "You're going to kill them, all of them." Walter grabbed a fistful of surgical tools from a nearby tray and started sawing at the medical cuffs, binding the other human captives to their tables. One by one they sat up, rubbing their chafed wrists, a feral light burning in their eyes. "You want payback?" Walter asked them. "You want to make them bleed? Then come with me. We're going to ram this alien bullshit right back down their throats." With the human prisoners freed, armed and hungry for vengeance, Walter and Evelyn fought their way to the shuttle bay. The Elysians were in disarray, choking and gasping as the ship's air bled away. Walter put them down without mercy. They piled into a heavily armored dropship and blasted free of the dying Elysian vessel. As it shrank away behind them, explosions rippling along its hull, Walter calmed Jack. "Mission accomplished," he said. "I've got a scientist here with intel on the Elysians' plan. They're looking for some kind of doomsday weapon. We need to beat them to it." But as their stolen dropship scorched through the atmosphere, a swarm of glinting silver shapes rose to meet them. Elysian fighters, escorting a monstrous assault lander. A hatch yawned open, and armored figures rappelled out on grav tethers. The Elysian super soldiers had been deployed. Walter wrenched the dropship into a screaming dive, juking and weaving. A storm of plasma fire chased them, stitching holes in their shields. The prisoners clung to the cargo netting, ashen-faced. One of the super soldiers landed on the hull with a bone-rattling thud. It clung there like a malignant tick, mono-edged claws sinking into the armor. It reared back and punched, once, twice, its fist shattering the cockpit canopy like cheap plastic. The wind howled through the breach, pulling at them with greedy fingers. Walter fought with the controls, barely keeping the ship level. Evelyn grabbed a plasma rifle and leaned out, screaming defiance as she fired. Bolts splashed off the creature's armor, barely even scorching it. It reached in with one taloned hand, servos hissing, and ripped Evelyn out of her harness as easily as plucking a flower. Her scream Dopplered away as she tumbled end over end, vanishing into the clouds below. "No!" Walter roared. He slapped the autopilot and launched himself at the super soldier, pistol barking. His rounds skipped off its armor like hail. It backhanded him across the face, splitting his lip, cracking a tooth. Walter spat blood and flung himself at it again, grappling, pounding at its impassive metal face with his battered fists. They crashed against the rear bulkhead in a tangle of limbs, servos whining, synthetic muscles thrumming with power. The super soldier was inhumanly strong. Walter's arms shook as he strained against it. His vision started to tunnel. Then he saw it. There on its arm a tattoo, a stylized eagle with 3 arrows in its talons. Ice flooded Walter's veins. He knew that symbol. It couldn't be, not after all these years. His mind flashed back to another lifetime. Gunfire, screams, smoke, and blood and betrayal. The eagle, the arrows, armature. This abomination, it had been human once, and Walter had an awful gut-wrenching feeling he knew exactly which human. His hesitation nearly cost him his life. The super soldier surged forward, smashing him back against the bulkhead, clawed fingers sinking into his throat. Walter's vision swam. His lungs burned, the edges of the world darkened. So this was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, but in the cold, merciless grip of a ghost from his past. A past, he now realized, that had never stopped haunting him. The Elysians, Armiger, it was all connected somehow. He'd been a pawn in their game from the start. And now it was too late. Too late to warn Jack. Too late to stop the Elysians from recovering the Omega device. Too late to save what was left of humanity from the fire. As the darkness closed in, Walter sent up one last desperate prayer. To anyone, anything that might be listening. Please, he thought, as the super soldier's fingers tightened inexorably around his neck, as the beat of his pulse thundered in his ears. Please, don't let it end like this. The blackness swallowed him. He fell down and down into a yawning abyss with no bottom. Light, blinding light, searing Walter's eyes even through his clenched eyelids. A roar, loud as God's own fury. A hammer blow that seemed to shake the very air. The super soldier's death grip slackened. Walter dropped to the deck, retching and gasping. He blinked tears from his eyes, uncomprehending. The super soldier lay crumpled against the far wall, a shoulder-fired plasma lance still smoking in the hands of one of the prisoners. Hole had been blown clean through the thing's chest, fist-sized and cauterized around the edges. It spasmed once, twice, then went still. Couldn't let you have all the fun, the prisoner said, lowering the lance. Walter just stared, struggling to process. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. The Elysian ship destroyed. The captives freed. But there was no time to celebrate, no time for relief or exhaustion, or the 100 other emotions welling up in his chest. Because he'd seen that tattoo, the eagle, the arrows, and he knew with a leaden certainty that this was only the beginning. The true battle was still to come. Walter dragged himself to the cockpit and poured power to the engines. The dropship clawed for altitude, limping, wounded, but still flying. They set course for the ancient city, for the secret buried beneath its sand-scoured ruins, for the Omega device and the fate of the human race. Behind them, the shattered wreckage of the Elysian dreadnought burned like a second sun, a pyre to light their way. Toward the future, toward revelation, toward the final reckoning, gathering like a storm on the horizon. Walter and the survivors stumbled through the scorching desert, their stolen dropship, a smoking ruin behind them. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the cracked earth. Each step was an effort, their bodies pushed to the brink of exhaustion. But they couldn't stop. The Elysians were out there, searching, hunting. Dr. Pierce trudged alongside Walter, her face lined with fatigue and grief. The memory of her abduction, the experiments, the horrors she'd witnessed aboard the alien ship, all weighed heavily on her. "How much further?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. Walter consulted the ancient map he'd found in the abandoned military bunker. The city should be just over those dunes. If we can make it there, we might have a chance. As they crested the rise, they saw it. The ancient city, its once proud towers reduced to crumbling husks, half buried in the shifting sands. But between them and their destination, a flicker of movement. "Get down," Walter hissed, pulling Dr. Pierce behind an outcropping of rock. A group of ragged figures emerged from the shimmering heat haze, weapons clutched in their hands. They wore mismatched bits of armor, their skin sunburned and sand-scoured. Walter tensed, ready for a fight, but then he saw the crude symbol painted on their breastplates. A human skull, cracked but defiant. Walter stepped out, hands raised. "Don't shoot, we're on your side." The lead fighter, a grizzled man with a scar bisecting his face, looked them over warily. More survivors? Thought the Elysians had scooped up everyone by now. "Not quite," Walter said. "We escaped from one of their ships. We're heading for the city, to the temple. We think there might be something there, something that can help us fight back." The man sized Walter up, then gave a curt nod. "Crazy bastard, I like it." He turned to his fighters. "All right, you scrubs. Looks like we're taking a detour. Move out." As they approached the city outskirts, A flicker of movement caught Walter's eye. Something darted between the ruins, too quick to follow. A chilling howl split the air, raising the hairs on the back of Walter's neck. The resistance fighters muttered uneasily, readying their weapons. Then they attacked. Monstrous shapes bounded from the shadows, all fangs and claws and glistening carapace. Hideous fusions of flesh and metal, twisted by Elysian science into something abominable. Plasma fire lit the gloom as the fighters opened up, the air filling with the stench of ozone and charred meat. But for every creature they cut down, 2 more sprang forward, heedless of the withering firepower. "Fall back!" Walter roared, blazing away with his rifle. "Into the city! Move!" They ran, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads, the snarls of the Elysian war beasts hot on their heels. They plunged into the warren of ancient streets and byways, the crumbling buildings swallowing them. But the creatures kept coming, scrambling over rubble piles and scuttling along walls, their metal limbs clattering on age-worn stone. The fighters fell one by one, dragged screaming into the dark. "This way," Dr. Pierce yelled, ducking into a gaping portal. "I think I see a way out." Walter and the last few survivors followed, emerging into a vast underground chamber. Towering columns marched off into the gloom, covered in intricate alien glyphs. A faint, eerie light seemed to emanate from the very walls. "What is this place?" Walter breathed, awestruck. A shrill, multi-toned cry echoed through the chamber. The abominations had found them. Walter and the others whirled, pouring fire into the tunnel mouth, but more and more creatures flooded in, a chittering, shrieking tide of claws and teeth. They fell back, deeper into the temple, the creatures hard on their heels. With a grunt of effort, Walter and the scarred man hauled a heavy stone slab across the entrance, sealing it. Panting in the sudden silence, they took stock. 4 of them left, trapped, surrounded. Then, with a deep, grinding rumble, hidden gears engaged. The walls began to move, sliding together, sealing off the chamber. They were locked in. In the oppressive darkness, a shape flickered into being. A hologram, but not like any Walter had seen before. It had weight, presence, like a living thing. It was tall, spindly, with too many arms and eyes that burned cold and pitiless. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in their bones. Dr. Pierce stared at the apparition, her face slack with shock. The language was like nothing Walter had ever heard, a discordant medley of tones and pitches that made his head throb. I don't know," Dr. Pierce stammered, "but I think it's a warning, and an activation sequence for something." She turned to him, her eyes haunted. "Walter, I think we may have just unleashed something far worse than the Elysians." The hologram continued to speak, its words dripping with ancient malice, and in the shadows beyond something began to stir. An unseen presence, heavy and suffocating, pressed in on them from all sides. Slow, dragging footsteps echoed in the dark. Something ancient, something hungry, roused from eons of slumber. They had escaped the Elysians, only to stumble into a trap laid long before the rise of man. And now, in the buried heart of the nameless city, they would face the true architects of their doom. The last desperate gambit of a species long dead, a final bitter curse on those who would come after. The Omega device was never meant for human hands. It was a key. As Dr. Pierce worked frantically to decipher the alien hologram's message, Walter and the others fanned out through the ancient temple, searching for any clue to the Omega device's location. The air hung heavy with a sense of foreboding, their every footstep echoing too loudly off the Cyclopean stones. In the flickering light of their torches, they found themselves faced with a series of intricate murals stretching from floor to shadowed ceiling. The images seemed to move and writhe before their eyes, depicting a cataclysmic war between 2 utterly alien races. And there, at the center of the conflict, the Omega device, a swirling vortex of eldritch energy. "Look here," the scarred resistance leader muttered, tracing a clawed finger over the arcane symbols. "If I'm reading this right, they brought the device here, to Earth, hid it away to keep it out of the wrong hands." Walter nodded grimly. The implications were staggering. But before he could ruminate further, a deep, bone-shaking rumble filled the chamber. Dust and ancient grit rained down from above as the temple trembled, the very foundations of the earth seeming to quail beneath them. "The Elysians," Dr. Pierce whispered, her face ashen. "They found us." The rumbling grew, crescendoing into a roar. The walls cracked, stone grinding against stone. They had only moments. They ran, stumbling and half-falling, down a hidden passageway that opened before them as if by sorcery. Behind them, the temple shook itself apart, burying the murals and their secrets under tons of rubble. The tunnel sloped down into the bowels of the earth, the air growing thick and stifling. And then they were stumbling out into a vast subterranean vault, a space that dwarfed even the grandest cathedral. And there, in the center of it all, was the machine. It towered over them, a monstrosity of heaving pistons and pulsing conduits, sheathed in an oily iridescence. The air around it shimmered with heat, the very flagstones underfoot warmed to the touch. "It's tapping into the core," Dr. Pierce breathed, her eyes wide with horrified fascination. "All that geothermal energy, it must be how they've kept the device hidden all this time." Walter took a halting step forward, then another. Something was calling to him, an irresistible magnetism that drew him inexorably toward the heart of the machine. He felt it thrumming through him, vibrating in his very bones. And then, suddenly, he was lifted off his feet, pulled by an unseen force. He dimly heard the others shouting his name, but they sounded so very far away. All there had ever been, was the machine. He came to rest at its center, held fast by invisible bonds. A flicker and then a hologram burst to life around him, a dizzying array of light and alien glyphs. And then, the memories came flooding into him in a relentless tide. He saw the ancient war, worlds scoured of life in the blink of an eye. He saw the device's creation, the sacrifices made to forge it, the uncounted lives given so that it might one day bring salvation, or damnation. And he saw himself, his lineage stretching back through the generations, to the very shadow keepers who had been tasked with the device's protection. It was his birthright, his burden. The knowledge settled into him like a lead weight in his chest. The power to stop the Elysians, to save what was left of humanity. It was his, if only he would claim it. But the price! Around him the temple shook and shuddered, cracks racing up the walls. The others were shouting, pleading with him to hurry, to decide. And still Walter hung suspended, paralyzed by indecision, as the last remnants of the human race awaited their fate. Walter's mind raced, the weight of his destiny pressing down on him like a physical force. The temple shook and quaked around them, the Elysian onslaught drawing ever closer. Time was running out. With a grimace, he tore himself away from the machine's interface, severing the connection. The ancient knowledge still burned in his mind, a searing brand he knew would never fade. "This way," he shouted over the cacophony of crumbling stone and alien weaponry. His fingers flew across the control panel, inputting commands that seemed to flow from his subconscious. With a deep, resonant hum, energy barriers sprang to life around the chamber, casting an eerie blue glow. The onslaught of plasma fire sizzled and spat against the shields, but they held, for now. Darkness enveloped them, thick and oppressive. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the distant, muffled impacts of the Elysians' assault. Walter fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow, winding passageway that descended sharply into the bowels of the earth. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and tense. "And watch your step, we don't know what's down here." They moved forward cautiously, the passage twisting and turning like the burrow of some giant serpent. The air grew colder, damper, carrying with it a strange, musty scent that none of them could place. Suddenly Dr. Pierce let out a soft gasp. "Look!" Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern, its walls glistening with moisture and strange phosphorescent growths. The flashlight beam played over the scene, revealing a network of ledges and outcroppings that descended into the depths. And there, flitting among the rocks and crevices, movement. Dozens of small luminescent creatures darted and wove through the air, leaving trails of shimmering light in their wake. They were unlike anything Walter had ever seen, a mesmerizing ballet of color and motion. "Fascinating," Dr. Pierce breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "They must be some kind of symbiotic organism linked to the Omega device. I think they're here to guide us." As if in response, one of the creatures drifted closer, hovering expectantly. Walter reached out, hesitant, and it alighted on his fingertip for the briefest of moments before darting away, deeper into the cavern. "I guess we follow," he said, swallowing hard. The weight in his chest seemed to grow heavier with each step, a leaden certainty of what lay ahead. They picked their way downward, following the darting, dancing lights. The cavern seemed to go on forever, a yawning abyss that swallowed all sense of time and direction. And then, suddenly, they were there. The cavern floor leveled out, giving way to a vast underground lake. Its surface was mirror-smooth, reflecting the dancing lights like a field of stars. And there in the center, an island. A towering structure rose from its rocky shore, all smooth lines and alien angles. It pulsed with an inner light, a heartbeat of raw, unfettered power that seemed to thrum through the very stones beneath their feet. Dr. Pierce opened her mouth to reply, but her words were lost in a sudden, deafening explosion. The cavern shook, showers of dust and debris raining down from above. Across the lake, a horde of Elysian super-soldiers poured into the cavern, their armor glinting in the eerie light. Plasma fire split the air, sizzling and spitting as it struck the rocks around them. "Go, go, go!" Walter roared, spurring the others forward. They charged towards the water's edge, plasma bolts whizzing past their heads. Walter felt the heat of a near miss singe his cheek, smelled the acrid stench of burning hair. He returned fire blindly, his rifle bucking in his hands. They hit the water at a full sprint, wading in up to their chests. The icy cold stole the breath from their lungs, but they pushed forward, struggling towards the island. Behind them, the Elysians surged into the lake, their heavy armor dragging them down. But they were relentless, implacable, closing the distance with each labored step. Plasma fire sizzled and hissed around them, steam rising in great billowing clouds where it struck the water. Walter felt a sudden, searing pain in his shoulder, heard Dr. Pierce cry out in agony. He turned, saw her stumble and fall, a smoking hole burned through her chest. Her eyes met his, wide and pleading. "Go," she gasped, blood bubbling from her lips. "Get to the device, end this, end it for all of us." Then the light faded from her eyes and she was gone, slipping beneath the dark waters. Grief and rage surged through Walter, a white-hot fury that burned away all fear, all doubt. He turned back towards the island, towards the pulsing, towering structure that held the key to humanity's salvation, or its ultimate destruction. His newfound abilities surged to the fore, an electric thrill that coursed through his veins. He could feel the Omega device now, could sense its power singing to him, calling him home. With a wordless cry of defiance, he unleashed that power, sent it surging out in a blinding wave of force. The Elysians were swept back, their armor crumpling like tin foil, their bodies broken and tossed aside like ragdolls. It was ancient, unknowable, a thing of gods and monsters, and it was his to command, his to control. As he reached the base of the structure, as he laid his hands upon its thrumming, pulsing surface, he knew that the fate of the human race hung in the balance. The Omega device was the key, and he, Walter Johnson, last of the Shadow Keepers, was the hand that would turn it for good or ill. The fate of the world, the fate of all he had ever known or loved, rested upon his shoulders in that moment, and as the power of the device surged through him, as it filled him, consumed him, he knew that there was no turning back. This was his destiny, this was what he had been born for. The last hope of humanity, in the heart of an alien temple, in the depths of the earth. The choice was his, and he would not fail. For in that moment, as the power of the Omega device coursed through him, as it burned in his veins like liquid fire, Walter Johnson knew one thing above all else. Humanity would survive. Humanity would endure, even if it cost him everything. He would pay that price. He would pay it gladly. For hope. For victory. Walter's heart pounded as he stepped onto the shores of the island, the towering alien structure looming before him. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. He approached the massive, ornate door, its surface etched with intricate glyphs that seemed to writhe and dance in the eerie light. Drawing upon the knowledge imparted to him by the ancient machine, Walter began to decipher the alien symbols. His fingers traced the grooves and ridges, his mind racing as the meaning became clear. With a deep breath, he pressed his palm against the center of the door. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as the glyphs flared to life, pulsing with a sickly green light. The door shuddered and then swung inward, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. Walter stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The chamber was filled with technology beyond anything he had ever seen. Holographic displays flickered and danced, projecting schematics and diagrams of the Omega device. Sleek, angular machines hummed and pulsed with arcane energies. And there, at the center of it all, stood a pedestal. Upon it rested a small, pulsating orb, no larger than a human heart. It glowed with an inner light shifting and changing like a living thing. The Omega device, the key to humanity's salvation, or its ultimate destruction. Walter approached the pedestal, his hand trembling as he reached out to claim the device. But before his fingers could brush its surface, a blinding flash of light erupted before him. He stumbled back, shielding his eyes, as a holographic figure materialized in the air. It was an alien, tall and spindly, with luminous eyes that seemed to pierce Walter's very soul. The last of the ancient race that had created the Omega device. "For you have come far, human," the alien spoke, its voice resonating in Walter's mind. "But the path you walk is fraught with peril. The Omega device is not meant for mortal hands." Walter stepped forward, meeting the alien's gaze. "My people are dying. The Elysians will stop at nothing to exterminate us. This device is our only hope." The alien regarded him for a long moment, its expression inscrutable. "The power you seek comes with a great responsibility and a terrible price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Walter clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I'll do whatever it takes to save humanity, no matter the cost." The alien inclined its head, a flicker of something like respect in its eyes. "Then take the device, Walter Johnson, but know that in doing so you will be forever changed. The burden you bear will be yours alone to carry." With a shaking hand, Walter reached out and grasped the Omega device. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through his body, setting every nerve alight with searing pain. He cried out, falling to his knees as the power of the device flooded into him, remaking him from the inside out. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Walter staggered to his feet, the Omega device clutched tightly in his hand. He could feel its power thrumming through him, a constant, pulsing presence at the back of his mind. But there was no time to dwell on it. The chamber shuddered violently, dust and debris raining down from above. The ancient structure, disturbed by the removal of the device, was beginning to collapse. Walter turned and ran, sprinting back through the crumbling passageways, the Omega device pulsing in his grip. The underground caverns trembled and shook, stalactites crashing down around him as he raced towards the surface. He burst out into the open air, gasping for breath, only to be met with a scene of utter devastation. The ancient city lay in ruins, the resistance fighters scattered and broken. Elysian war machines stomped through the rubble, their weapons still smoking from the slaughter. Walter's heart sank as he surveyed the carnage. They had been too late. The Elysians had overrun their defenses, crushing the last remnants of human resistance. And now, with the Omega device in hand, the choice fell to him. He could use the device's power to destroy the Elysians, to wipe them from the face of the earth in a single, cataclysmic blast. But to do so would mean unleashing a force beyond his control, one that could just as easily consume humanity as well. Or he could seek another path, a way to end the conflict without resorting to such devastating measures. But what hope was there of negotiation, of peace, with an enemy that had already proven its ruthless determination to eradicate mankind? As Walter grappled with the impossible choice before him, a shadow fell across the ruins. He looked up to see a massive Elysian warship descending from the smoke-choked sky, its hull bristling with weapons. A hatch yawned open, and a figure emerged, clad in ornate armor that glinted in the harsh light. Emperor Hydrus himself, the supreme leader of the Elysian horde. "You have something that belongs to me, human," the Emperor hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "Surrender the Omega device, and I may grant you a swift death." Walter's grip tightened on the device, the power within it surging in response to his anger. He knew that the fate of humanity hung in the balance, that the next few moments would determine the course of history. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with resolve as he prepared to make his final stand. The Omega device thrummed in his hand, its ancient power ready to be unleashed. One way or another, this ended now. Walter stood tall, the Omega device thrumming with power in his grasp. Emperor Hydrus loomed before him, a sneer of contempt twisting his scaly features. "You think that toy can save you, human?" Hydrus hissed. "You are nothing, your species is nothing. Surrender the device and I may grant you a quick death." Walter's jaw tightened. He raised the Omega device, feeling its energy coursing through his veins. A shimmering field of force sprang into existence around him, pulsing with an otherworldly light. Hydrus barked a command, and his soldiers surged forward, plasma rifles blazing. Bolts of searing energy slammed into Walter's barrier, but it held firm. With a wave of his hand, Walter reached out through the device, feeling the very fabric of reality bending to his will. The ground beneath the advancing Elysians shuddered and cracked. A chasm yawned open, swallowing a dozen of the alien warriors, their screams echoing as they plummeted into the abyss. Hydrus roared in fury. The warship above pivoted, its cannons swiveling to target Walter. A storm of energy blasts rained down, the impacts shaking the earth. But Walter stood unscathed at the heart of the maelstrom, the Omega device deflecting the onslaught with contemptuous ease. As the battle raged around him, a strange sensation washed over Walter. The device was not merely a weapon, he realized. It was an instrument of creation, limited only by the wielder's imagination. He reached out once more, shaping the battlefield to his whim. Walls of solid light sprang up, shielding his beleaguered allies. Elysian soldiers found themselves trapped in glowing cages, unable to advance or retreat. But even as Walter reveled in his newfound power, he felt a growing pressure behind his eyes. Whispers echoed at the edges of his consciousness, the alien voices of the device's long-dead creators urging him to delve deeper, to unleash its full potential. Walter gritted his teeth, forcing the whispers back. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. Amidst the chaos, he caught a flicker of movement in the ruins of the ancient city. A small group of Elysians, led by a figure in a hooded cloak, broke away from the main battle, slipping into the shadows of the crumbling structures. A sense of unease pricked at Walter's mind. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain how, but he knew he had to follow them. "Hold the line," he shouted to the resistance fighters. "I'll be back." Ignoring their cries of protest, Walter sprinted into the ruins. The Omega device's energy field parting the rubble before him like water. He tracked the Elysians through the winding streets and toppled buildings, guided by an instinct he couldn't name. Finally he cornered them in a ruined temple, its once grand walls now little more than shattered stone and faded frescoes. The hooded figure turned to face him, and Walter felt his breath catch in his throat. The figure reached up and pushed back its hood, revealing a face Walter had never thought he'd see again. His brother, Ethan, his features achingly familiar despite the years and the scars. "Hello, Walter," Ethan said softly. "It's been a long time." Walter stared, his mind reeling. Ethan was alive. Ethan was here. Ethan was working with the Elysians? "I thought you were dead," Walter managed, his voice hoarse. "All this time I thought—" "I know." Ethan stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "There's so much to explain and so little time." "These soldiers are part of a faction that opposes Hydrus," Ethan said. "They want to end this war, to find a path to peace, and they believe the key lies with you, Walter, with the Omega device." Walter looked down at the artifact in his hands, feeling its power thrumming through his bones. Peace. Could such a thing be possible, after all the death, all the destruction? "I know you want revenge," Ethan said quietly, "but more bloodshed won't solve anything. The device is more than a weapon. It's a tool for creation, for unity. You can use it to build a bridge between our species, to forge a new future." Walter closed his eyes, the whispers of the device's creators swirling in his mind. He saw visions of the past, of the war that had torn the galaxy asunder, and he saw glimpses of what could be, of a universe where humans and Elysians stood side by side, united in purpose. But he also saw the faces of those he had lost, Dr. Pierce, Jack, the countless others who had fallen to the Elysians' cruelty. The weight of their sacrifice hung heavy on his soul. He opened his eyes, meeting Ethan's gaze. In that moment, the path ahead crystallized with a terrible clarity. The voices of the device's makers echoed in his mind, no longer whispers, but a deafening chorus. The Omega device could end the conflict, but not in the way Ethan imagined. It could erase the Elysians from existence, wiping the slate clean. A fresh start for humanity, free from the shadow of an alien threat. Or it could reshape reality itself, rewriting history so that the war never happened. The dead would live again, the cities would stand tall, and the scars of the past would be nothing more than fading nightmares. But the price would be Walter's very identity. His memories, his experiences, everything that made him who he was. The device demanded sacrifice, and it would have it one way or another. In the end, it came down to a simple choice: vengeance or redemption, destruction or creation, past or future. He raised the Omega device, feeling its power surge through him like an exploding star. The whispers in his mind became a roar, drowning out all other thoughts. He would end this war once and for all. He would give humanity a chance to rebuild, to thrive, to reach the stars without fear, even if it meant sacrificing everything he was, everything he had ever been. Walter closed his eyes, surrendering to the device's ancient will. Reality shattered around him, and the universe held its breath. In the moment before the world ended and began anew, Walter saw the faces of those he loved, those he had lost, those he had never known. The Omega device pulsed, and a wave of blinding light engulfed the battlefield, the city, the planet, the galaxy. A heartbeat later, there was only silence and the soft, steady thrum of creation. Walter stood silent, his mind reeling as he struggled to process his brother's revelations. The Omega device, the ancient alien artifact that had seemed like the key to humanity's salvation, was not a weapon of destruction, but a tool for fostering peace and understanding between different species. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Brother, I know this is a lot to take in, but you must understand. The path to peace is never easy. It requires sacrifice, compromise, and above all, the willingness to see beyond our differences." Walter met his brother's gaze, searching for any hint of deception. But all he saw was a deep, unwavering sincerity. He took a deep breath, the weight of the Omega device heavy in his hands. "All right," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm listening." Ethan nodded, a flicker of relief passing over his face. "The Elysians who stand with me, we believe that the Omega device holds the key to ending this conflict once and for all, not through destruction, but through communication and understanding." He gestured to the ancient alien glyphs that adorned the walls of the temple. These beings, they were not so different from us. They too faced conflict and strife, but they found a way to overcome it. The Omega device was their greatest achievement, a testament to the power of cooperation and unity. Walter ran his fingers over the intricate symbols, feeling the thrumming energy that pulsed within the device. "But how?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "How can we use it to bring peace when there has been so much bloodshed, so much hatred on both sides?" Ethan's expression grew somber. "It will not be easy," he admitted, "but we must start somewhere. The Omega device can help us to understand one another, to see past the fear and mistrust that have driven us apart." He turned to face the Elysian soldiers who stood behind him, their faces hidden beneath their helmets. "We have all suffered in this war," he said, his voice ringing out in the stillness of the temple. "Human and Elysian alike, but we cannot let that suffering define us. We must find a way to move forward, to build a future where our children can live in peace and harmony." Walter felt a stirring in his heart, a flicker of hope that he had not allowed himself to feel in a long, long time. Could it be possible? Could there truly be a way to end this conflict without more death and destruction? "What was that?" he shouted over the rumble of shifting stone. Ethan's face paled, his eyes widening in horror. "Hydrus," he breathed, "he's found us." As if on cue, a deafening explosion ripped through the air, the force of the blast sending them tumbling to the ground. Walter pushed himself up, his ears ringing, his vision blurred by the swirling dust. Through the haze, he could see the massive form of Hydrus's warship hovering above the ruins of the city, its weapons already glowing with deadly energy. "He means to bury us," Ethan coughed, struggling to his feet, "to entomb the Omega device and anyone who stands in his way." Walter gritted his teeth, a surge of defiance rising within him. He would not let it end like this, not when they were so close to finding a path to peace. He reached out with his mind, feeling the ancient power of the Omega device flowing through him. The air shimmered and warped, a glowing portal forming before them. "Quickly," he shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm. "We have to get out of here." Together they raced through the portal, the Elysian soldiers close behind. The temple shuddered and groaned, ancient pillars crumbling to dust as Hydrus's onslaught intensified. But Walter did not look back, his focus entirely on the shimmering gateway before him. With a final burst of speed, they leapt through the portal, the temple collapsing behind them in a deafening roar of stone and metal. And there, standing before them, was Emperor Hydrus himself. The Elysian leader towered over them, his armor gleaming in the harsh desert sun, his eyes cold and pitiless, fixed upon the Omega device clutched in Walter's hands. "You have something that belongs to me, human," Hydrus hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "Surrender the device and your deaths will be swift and painless." Walter straightened, meeting the Emperor's gaze without flinching. "The Omega device belongs to all of us," he said, his voice steady and clear. "It is a tool for peace, not a weapon of war. I will not let you twist its power to serve your own ends." Hydrus snarled, his clawed hand tightening around the hilt of his plasma blade. "You dare defy me? I will tear that device from your cold, dead hands if I must." But before he could make good on his threat, Ethan stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Emperor Hydrus," he said, his voice ringing out across the desert sands. "I am Ethan Johnson, brother of Walter, and ally to those of your kind who seek an end to this conflict." Hydrus paused, his eyes narrowing. "You are the traitor who has been sowing dissent among my people," he growled. "I should kill you where you stand." But Ethan did not falter, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I am no traitor," he said firmly. "I am a seeker of truth and a champion of peace, and I believe that there is a way for our two peoples to coexist, to build a future together." He gestured to the Omega device, still glowing softly in Walter's hands. "This device, it holds the key to our salvation, not as a weapon, but as a tool for understanding and communication. If we can learn to use its power wisely, we can bridge the gap between our species and forge a lasting peace." Hydrus remained silent, his expression unreadable. For a long, tense moment no one moved, the only sound the howling of the desert wind. Then slowly the Elysian Emperor lowered his blade. "A truce," he said at last, his voice heavy with reluctance. "A temporary ceasefire until we can determine the true nature of this device and its role in our shared future." Walter let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was a start, a fragile glimmer of hope in the darkness of war. "The device must be kept safe," Hydrus continued, his gaze still fixed upon the ancient artifact. "It cannot fall into the wrong hands. I propose a neutral location, guarded by both human and Elysian forces, until a more permanent solution can be found." Walter hesitated, the weight of the Omega device heavy in his hands. Could he trust the Elysians after all the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon his people? Could he take that leap of faith, that first step towards a brighter future? He met his brother's gaze, saw the hope and determination shining in his eyes, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. "Agreed," he said, his voice steady and clear. "A temporary truce for the sake of peace." And as the two leaders stood there, human and Elysian, united in a fragile moment of understanding, Walter felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a long, long time. As the dust settled around the ruins of the ancient city, Walter and his brother set to work forging a new path forward. The ceasefire between the Elysians and humans was fragile, but it held the promise of a better future. Together, they formed a council of representatives from both races to guide the rebuilding efforts and ensure the Omega device was used for the good of all. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The council met tirelessly, debating and negotiating the terms of the new peace. Trade routes were established, connecting the scattered settlements of both Elysians and humans. The shattered cities slowly began to rise from the ashes brick by brick as the two races worked side by side. Walter found himself at the center of it all, a symbol of hope and unity for both peoples. His name was spoken with reverence in the streets, his image plastered on the walls of the newly rebuilt buildings. But the weight of his responsibilities began to take their toll. The Omega device, now securely housed in the council chambers, called to him constantly. Its whispers filled his dreams, ancient voices speaking in tongues he could not understand. He would wake in the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. As the months passed, the visions grew more vivid, more insistent. Walter found himself losing time, slipping into waking dreams where the lines between reality and hallucination blurred. He saw the city in ruins, the streets running red with blood. He saw himself at the center of the carnage, the Omega device pulsing in his hands. He pushed himself harder, burying himself in his work on the council. But even there he could not escape the growing sense of unease. There were some among the Elysians who chafed at the new order, who longed for a return to the old ways of conquest and domination. Zax, a hardline Elysian warrior, emerged as the leader of this faction. He spoke of Hydrus's vision, of the glory of the Elysian Empire reborn. In secret meetings and shadowed alleys, he gathered his followers, stoking the flames of discontent. And then, on a night when the city slept and the council chambers stood empty, they made their move. The sound of shattering glass jolted Walter from his fitful slumber. He leapt from his bed, his heart pounding, as the echoes of blaster fire and screams filled the air. He knew, with a sinking certainty, what was happening. He raced through the darkened corridors of the council building, the Omega device clutched tight to his chest. The guards lay unmoving at their posts, cut down before they could raise the alarm. Walter burst into the council chambers, only to find himself face to face with Zax and his followers. The Elysian warrior grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. "The age of peace is over," he snarled. "The Omega device belongs to us now." Walter felt the ancient power surging through his veins, begging to be unleashed. He raised his hand and the room exploded in a blaze of light. The walls shook and crumbled as he and Zax clashed, their powers fueled by the device's limitless energy. Furniture splintered and shattered. Windows exploded outward in a hail of glass. Walter felt the strain of the device on his mind and body, the searing pain of its power threatening to consume him. With a final, desperate push, He unleashed a massive wave of energy that swept through the room like a tidal wave. Zax and his followers were caught in the blast, their bodies disintegrating in the searing light. And then it was over. The Omega device, its power exhausted, crumbled to dust in Walter's hands. He stood alone amidst the ruins of the council chambers, his body battered and his mind reeling. In the days that followed, the council worked to pick up the pieces. The remnants of Zax's faction were rounded up and brought to justice, their schemes laid bare before the people. But the damage had been done. The trust between Elysians and humans, so painstakingly built, had been shattered. Walter knew what he had to do. He stepped down from his position on the council, leaving his brother to carry on the work of peace. The Omega device was gone, but the scars it had left behind would take a lifetime to heal. With a heavy heart, Walter set out into the wasteland, a solitary figure against the barren landscape. He did not know where his path would lead him, only that he had to find a way to make amends for the destruction he had wrought. The road ahead would be long and difficult, the wounds of the past slow to heal. But for the first time in centuries, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon, a chance for a better future, bought with blood and sacrifice. And as Walter walked on, the sun rising slowly over the ruined city behind him, he knew that he would not rest until that future had been secured, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.